Good evening, afternoon, good evening, everyone. Welcome, welcome. We'll give folks a couple of minutes to join, and I am going to begin sharing my screen. I put together some PowerPoints, so proud of that. But this evening, we'll be setting the stage for a co-learning opportunity. I really believe in the pedagogy of political education where everyone has knowledge to bring to the table. I am only an expert on my own life and experiences, and you are the expert of yours. So I'm excited that we are all going to learn together about organizing. I think that right now the country is in a real state of emergency. I think that the leak from the Supreme Court that's going to possibly overturn Roe versus Wade makes this series, this beginning of a series of organizing trainings, very timely, because the way that we win, the way that we beat back this attack from the right is to fight. And that fight cannot be won without being organized. So again, welcome everyone. I'm going to share my screen, hopefully, and we will get started. And what I want to do is put this into there. Yay. All right, so this evening is simply going to be an orientation. We're not going to get too deep into the weeds. We're going to have some story sharing about how a few of us got involved in the work that we do and why it's important to us. And we're just going to talk about a basic framework for organizing. My name is India Walton. I am the senior strategic organizer with Roots Action. And I just want, as a disclaimer, I do come from the Marshall Gantz School of Organizing at Harvard Kennedy University. So this, a lot of this content comes from the Leading Change Network and that framework of organizing. In my opinion, organizing is a skill and also an art. There are many, many theories of change, and today we will just be introducing one, but I also want to open up space for folks to share their opinions, experiences, and their theory of change also. So welcome everyone. Thank you for joining. If you would please rename yourself. Click on the lower left-hand corner of the screen and tell us your name, your pronouns, and where you're from. For example, my name is India Walton. I go by she, her, and I am based in Buffalo, New York. And first name is perfectly fine. There, see, I did it. So I'll give a second for folks to also rename themselves. And I think my instructions are kind of wrong, actually. In the upper right-hand corner, there's 3 dots. Click on that and you'll see rename. If you just put your first name, your pronouns, and where you are from, that would be helpful. Thank you very much. So today, we are going to make an effort to understand the essence of organizing. What is organizing? When I got my first job as an organizer, my mother told all of her friends that I was a paid activist. But organizing is much more than just direct actions and protests. Organizing is actually a skill, right? And an art, like I said before. We're also going to understand organizing as a leadership practice, right? As with any skill or even talent, practice makes perfect. But in this case, organizing can never be perfected because we're always sort of shifting our tactics and strategies dependent upon the political climate in many cases. And at the end, we're going to begin to develop a public narrative, starting with the story of self. Why are you here? Why do you want to do this work? What brings you to this point where you've either been politicized or traumatized or just fed up enough to want to be a change maker in your community. One thing I want to stress is that organizing is an evolutionary process. And there's no way that you can attend one basic organizing course and have all of the tools and information that you need to move forward. So this is definitely an introduction. There will be other opportunities to join us in learning together. Every 2 weeks, we'll come together and we'll tackle a different part of organizing. Organizing training for me was a semester long course, but also just a lifetime of learning, of building relationships, of self-discovery, and of responding to the needs of my community. So if you will, in the chat, we already have names, but if you're affiliated with an organization, please pop that in the chat. Let us know where you are. We're from all over the country. I'm here in Buffalo, New York. It is 6-ish in the evening. This is where I call home. So tell us where you're from, and also tell us what's important to you. What is the change that you want to make, whether it is abolishing the police state, whether it's anti-militarism and being concerned about the increase in nuclear armaments across the world, whether you've been seriously impacted by Roe v. Wade. Tell us where you're from and why you are here. What's driving you to want to do this work? And I'll pause for just a moment and allow folks to pop that in the chat. And the reason why this is important is because as folks join and re-enter, we want to be able to really help you develop action plans, strategy, and campaigns that are going to be able to help you affect the change that you want to see, whether that's a local campaign or whether it's a nationwide thing. We want this to be a space where we're not only learning together and from one another, but also a space where we are able to connect people to do the work that is necessary to get the changes that we need. Thank you, everyone, for sharing who you are and where you're from. I'll start with a quote, and Marshall always opens with this quote. And for those of you who are not familiar with who Marshall Gantz is, Marshall Gantz is a longtime organizer who not only organized with Cesar Chavez for the grape workers strike, but also played an integral part in the Obama campaign and sort of the decentralized method of organizing that was used in the presidential campaign of Barack Obama. So this quote, "If I am not for myself, who will be for me? When I'm only for myself, what am I? If not now, when?" And this is from the first century. And I think that it resonates deeply with me because what are we waiting for? Who are we waiting for, right? And the answer, in my opinion, is that we are the ones that we are waiting for. We are put on this earth to make pathways and improvements for other folks, especially those who are marginalized and who don't have the agency or liberty to speak up on behalf of themselves, and also to enable others to really stand in their power. So a word about leadership, and the definition that we use for leadership is accepting responsibility, right? Being a leader is a responsibility for enabling others. You'll very rarely hear me use the word empower because I don't have the ability to empower anyone. I can enable someone to stand in the power that they possess, but folks have to empower themselves. So leadership is accepting responsibility for enabling others to achieve shared purpose in the face of uncertainty. And again, it's very timely right now that we're talking about this, because we're definitely living in some very uncertain times, right? So the model of leadership that we're going to talk about is different than these three, right? Like there are these three types of leadership where there's this sort of central figure, right, who is the leader, the singular leader. And then there's this diffuse model where like everyone's a leader, but there is no sort of central theory of change. And then there's this hierarchical structure where like there's a leader at the top who then sort of dictates who else gets to be in leadership positions. But what we want to do is have this snowflake structure where we're all in relationship together, where we know that we have the skills necessary to drive the work and move goals forward, but that we're in deep relationship with people and that we're building trust. Now, a word about power, and I feel like I've already been talking for too long, but bear with me. A word about power. Power is the ability to achieve purpose. Power is how we get student debt cancellation. Power is how we get voting rights. Power is how we get Build Back Better. And we've been seeing right now the power that we thought we had by voting blue, no matter who, is not necessarily a thing. So we have to go back to the drawing board and figure out how we yield the power that we do have and make it into meaningful and purposeful action. So organizing. Organizing is turning the resources that you have into the power you need to get the change that you want. It sounds very easy, but it requires a lot of work, right? How do you identify the resources that you have? And especially on the left or in the progressive circles, however you want to name it, what we often lack is resources. We don't have as much money as our opposition, but what we do have is people. And organizing, to me, means that we use the resources that we have to get what we want, and the resource that we have is people. And that requires deep relationship building and being thoughtful and intentional about how we leverage the resources and tools that we have to create change. So the questions you always want to ask is, who are your people, right? Your people can be the city or town where you live. It can be your neighbors on your block. It could be people who, it could be women who want access to bodily autonomy and abortion and reproductive rights. It can be incarcerated people who've been wrongfully convicted of things that have been criminalized needlessly, right? So the questions you're going to ask yourself are, who are your people? What is the change that they need? And how you can turn those resources into power, and what the strategic goal is in all of your organizing. What do you really want to get out of it, right? Like, what are the steps to abolishing the police state? What are the steps to ending the war on drugs, AKA the war on people? What are the steps to compelling the current administration to codify Roe versus Wade and protect childbearing people, for all of eternity, so we don't have to deal with this every single election cycle. So about resources, how do you turn the resources into the power that you need, right? Letter writing, text banking, phone calls, protests. Richie's going to talk a little bit later about some of the work that is happening out in LA. How can you leverage the power with one another? None of us are islands. We have to do this together. And how can we use our resources to challenge the power that others have over us? This is really what we're seeing right now, is that we're in a position where the people who are making decisions on our behalf don't have the experience and knowledge to make prudent ones. We're seeing budgets that benefit millionaires and billionaires over working class people. We're seeing union busting, and again, and just because we're in this moment, I'm going to keep harping on, we're seeing a whole bunch of cis white men make decisions about what childbearing people are allowed to do with their own bodies. So it's really time for us to reclaim that power. So again, 4 questions. What do my people want, right? And that question is not for an individual to decide. That is a collective decision, right? That you need to sit with the folks who are impacted, the folks you are working with, to see what it is that we really want at the end of it all. Who has the resources to allow us to get what we want? And in our very transactional society, usually the person who has the resources, if we're targeting unelected officials, for example, they're going to want something in return. So what is the person or people or entity that has the resources that we want? What do they want from us? And what resources do we have that they need, whether that be votes or political cover. And later on down the line, we'll talk more about political cover when we get into how we manage relationships with elected officials and allies, right? A protest is not always an oppositional thing. Sometimes you have to make enough noise for your allies to be able to say, there's nothing I can do. I had to move because that's what my constituents wanted. So in my world, successful organizing has 3 major outcomes, and I'm definitely a product of successful organizing. One is that it improves society, right? There is a clear and concise goal. When we think about climate change, when we think about denuclearization, a successful organizing campaign is going to result in the betterment of society. Organizationally, organizing has the ability to create capacity. Our organizations, especially member-based and base-building organizations, need people in order for them to run. So successful organizing means that our organizations will have increased capacity. And on an individual level, it facilitates leadership. It allows a little brown girl from Buffalo who grew up poor to run for mayor, and to share my time, talent, and treasure with folks from all over the country, when otherwise, I should be on welfare and standing on the breadline. So organizing really has the ability to develop leadership skills among individuals, and all of these things are vitally important as we move forward. So the 5 leadership principles that we'll talk about in this series, there's actually 6, but the 5 core is public narrative that we're going to get into a little bit today. That's our shared story. And public narrative in this framework means that we are telling the story of self, who you are, what brings you to this work, why. We're telling the story of us, how my story connects to other people who've had similar experiences or not. Like, how do you pull on the heartstrings of folks to get them to care about what you care about in the story of now, the urgency of the moment, and why we can't continue to sit back and wait for others to act, why we need to activate and motivate ourselves. There's also relational commitments. We'll talk about one-on-ones. There's a clear structure, creative strategy, and effective action. And that is big. you want to make sure that whatever strategic goals you have are lining up with your ultimate mission. And the sixth point that sort of intertwines all of this is coaching. We don't behave as islands. We need someone to go to, a confidant, when things don't seem to be working out quite as we expected them to not solve the problem for us, but to have a genuine curiosity about the strategies and tactics that are being used, how effective they are, and really pushing us to stretch our imagination and really hone our skills to make sure that we're being effective in everything that we do. And before we get into stories, I'm going to invite Richie and Sam to tell their stories about how they got involved in organizing and work and what it means to them. I just want to say this is difficult work. It's definitely a trial and error type of thing. And it's often been compared to riding a bike. When you started, you weren't that great. You fell a lot. You made a lot of mistakes. But the more you do it, the more natural it becomes. And then you never forget. But there will be some bumps and bruises along the way. But we are here as a community to support one another. There's no such thing as a silly question. And we really want to be a resource and a support for folks who are really interested in getting engaged in doing this work. So that poor kid, I'm pretty sure eventually got his bearings and learned how to ride on two wheels. So again, we're, as organizers, gonna ask who your people are, what resources you can use in an effective way, and what the change is that you seek. So now I would like for Richie to just tell us a little bit about yourself and the work that you're doing, how you got here, and what it means.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for hosting this, India. Honored to be in this work with you. And so I am Richie Serjanko, he, him. I'm a activist here in LA with a group called People City Council. I also do social media for Roots Action. So that's part of the reason why I'm here. Yeah, so like how I got started in organizing, I was working in a law firm in 2019, and I was really not enjoying like the work that I was doing. And I was seeing people, Sunrise Movement really got me inspired, seeing them show up outside of Nancy Pelosi's office and going to Dianne Feinstein's office. And I was like, okay, like I want to be involved with this kind of work. Like, how do I do that? And so actually I just decided to leave my job and dedicate myself entirely to the people's work. And I started organizing with Sunrise Movement, and then 2020 happened. And first with the pandemic, and we started organizing around tenants' rights and calling for a rent freeze and for no evictions. And then George Floyd lost his life to the hands of the police, and that sparked an outrage in all over the country. And I was out in the streets in Los Angeles, and a crazy thing is, though, India, about a month before George Floyd was killed, I had just got involved with this coalition called the People's Budget LA Coalition, which we focus on a participatory budgeting within the city and the city's budget, because the city of Los Angeles spends $3 billion on the police every year, and that's ridiculous. And so part of my work as an abolitionist and figuring, and just like what India has been describing, figuring out how to get where we want to go and all the natural steps. And as far as abolition goes, part of the process is defunding the police. And so we were involved with this budget battle, and then George Floyd was killed, and it really started to allow us to push really hard on the budget stuff. And part of organizing, as India described, is like, how do you get people on our side? And protesting can be a way to get people on your side, and it can be a way to get politicians on our side. So yeah, definitely follow the People's City Council. We were out in the streets last night when the city decided to respond in full force with LAPD, and DHS was there in response to the abortion protests. And just like one last thing, what we are focused on is basically letting the people know who their enemies are. And currently, our enemies are, the ruling class, which 8 of 15 members on city council in Los Angeles are landlords. And so when they pass certain laws, they're doing it in their class interests. And so when you think about organizing, who can you organize? Well, are there poor and working class people that already understand the conditions that, they're living and that we're talking about? And presumably you'll be able to attract a large group of them, or are you trying to filter your message to meet someone in the middle, centrist, or moderate? And for us, we try to organize around poor, working class, Black and brown communities. And so when you're thinking about organizing, think about how to grow your base, how to build power, get people on your side, rather trying to appease other people who aren't really in agreement with you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing. Richie's doing some really remarkable work out of LA. And just one last thing, Richie, if folks want to follow your work, can you just plug where they can find you?
Yes, absolutely. So I'll drop it in the chat, but People's City Council on Instagram and Twitter. Twitter is more active, but we are abolitionists, and we try to fulfill our ideology and live up to it. And we don't mess with the cops. We are not nice to the cops. They do not deserve our respect, especially here in Los Angeles with one of the most murderous police forces in LAPD. But also we have the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department, which are an organized crime group. And for those of you who don't understand LA, the Sheriff's Department has 18 active deputy gangs within the department. So there are cop gangs within the department. And basically every other public official in the city and the state are afraid to stand up to the sheriff. And he's currently running Facebook ads against me, a private citizen, because he's afraid of being held accountable.
Yeah.
So yeah, all People's City Council.
You make sure that you stay safe. I've been watching what's happening, and know that if you need to get out of there, there's space for you here in Buffalo.
Okay.
So next up, I want to tag in Sam, who is also going to talk a little bit about his story, what brings him to this work, and also a little bit more about the work that we do here at Roots Action.
Sure. Hey, everyone, I'm Sam, he, him, and I'm an organizer with Roots Action. I started this work a while ago when I was working in New York, and every day I went to work and I walked by the Occupy Wall Street encampment that was in Zuccotti/Freedom Park downtown. I didn't really know much about what Occupy was about. So I started stopping by, and a lot of the things they were talking about really were resonating with me as someone who was like a millennial with student debt and couldn't find jobs that provided me with healthcare, and had to move in New York every year because my rent went up 4, 5, 10, 12, 15%. One year my rent was raised, and I was living paycheck to paycheck, and I just couldn't do that. So I had to move like every year, which was really expensive. And I thought, man, there has to be, another, I knew I wasn't the only person in that situation because it was happening to many of my friends. And I thought there has to be another better way to do this. So I started looking around for groups that were active in housing and tenants' rights. And I got involved in the New York DSA there, Democratic Socialists of America, because they had a real presence and they were really talking about why is it that our rents keep going up year after year if the cost, if wages aren't increasing at that rate, and why does the cost of living keep going up if we can't pay for things? And I thought this is a group that is organized, that has activism at the forefront of their mind, and started getting involved with the DSA. And through doing that work for a couple of years, I ended up at an organization called Our Revolution that was founded after Bernie Sanders' 2016 campaign. Started working with Our Revolution, basically trying to figure out how can we get more working class people, more people of color, more people who understand what their constituents are actually going through day after day into elective office. And it's still work that I'm passionate about. And after that, I came to Roots Action, where we organize around the issues that are most important to us. So it's more issue facing, talking about student debt, talking about nuclear proliferation, and just really wanting to mobilize people around these issues, make sure that we're heard, not just within these cloistered rooms in Congress, but also that we're heard out on the street, and that people know that these are pressing, urgent issues that we have to deal with now because we don't get to deal with them later. So that's why I'm doing this work. That's why I've shunned the path of traditional corporate office work, and now I'm a itinerant activist type. I'm really happy to be here organizing with India and with Richie. Really happy that India is putting on this series of calls, and I hope that you all find them really useful, and happy to be an ongoing resource for folks who are organizing in their own communities as well. So thanks for being here.
Thank you for sharing, Sam. And I think maybe I should tell my story also. So I'm India. I go by she, her. I had my first child when I was 14 years old. And by the time I was 19, I was pregnant with twins. My twins were born at 24 weeks, and they spent 6 months in the hospital. And I would go visit and I would call, and I never felt like I was their mother. I felt like decisions were kind of being made like on top of me. Like everyone was talking above my head. Like no one really consulted me about what I felt was best for my children. And one day I expressed this frustration to one of the nurses, and she said, if you don't like it, go be a nurse. So I went and became a nurse. And I thought that all of my problems were solved. I was like solidly middle class. By this time, I was married with my children. I was a registered nurse working in the same intensive care unit where my twins were taken care of. And I felt like I was there to be a fighter for people who look like me, for young mothers, for Black and Brown and Latinx mothers. But nothing really changed with me being on the inside. So eventually I transitioned out of the acute care setting, and I was a school nurse, and I worked in the inner city. For those of you who don't know much about Buffalo, it's the third poorest city of its size in the country. We've got issues, lots of them. So what I noticed was that a lot of students were coming to visit me, not because they were physically ill, but because they were suffering from the consequences of concentrated poverty and disadvantage. These are children who were coming to me asking if I had an extra breakfast bar, wanting to just cry and talk about the trauma they were experiencing in the community. So at a certain point, I'm like, being a nurse is great, but tackling these issues one child, one patient at a time is not enough. And I really wanted to work on policy and at a broader scale. So I left my job as a registered nurse, and I became an organizer. My first organizing job was with an organization called Open Buffalo. And I did everything from housing justice to criminal legal reform. I led the local arm of the campaign to legalize adult use cannabis in New York State. I co-founded a community land trust to ensure permanently affordable housing in the city of Buffalo, and eventually became the executive director. And in doing this work, I found out that the barrier to progress for a lot of community-based organizations and nonprofits came out of our own city hall. There are people with great ideas who've done hard work to bring in resources, and we can't get anything done because our city council and our mayor are checked out and are not paying attention. So after the uprisings of 2020, after the murder of George Floyd, we saw people out in the streets and we were ignored. So I said, if we can take these people who've been protesting and turn them into door knockers, phone bankers, campaigners, we can overthrow the very system that has been ignoring us for far too long. And that's exactly what we did. I came in as a complete political novice, never ran for office before, and with an all-volunteer staff, we successfully unseated a 16-year, 4-term incumbent in the Democratic primary here in Buffalo. Subsequently, he got together with his developer friends, real estate folks, very wealthy people, members of the far right, and even known white supremacists, like folks who have actually been named in the January 6th insurrection, to mount a writing campaign. And as a result of that, we didn't succeed in the general election, and he is still mayor for 4 more years. But what that started, though, is a series of events where, number one, we've discovered that we can challenge the status quo, that we can challenge the Democratic establishment and have an alternative that is carrying forth our values, our issues, and we can support candidates who are running on platforms that prioritize working class people, poor people, Black people, brown people, women, trans, LGBTQ, people who are often left in the margins and shadows are now brought into the light. So I'm just really excited to be on the Roots Action team to continue doing this work. And it's more important now than ever before. We're seeing the war in Ukraine. We're seeing the decimation of voting rights, of bodily autonomy in this country. So I'm just so grateful for everyone who showed up here tonight and your dedication to continue moving forward. It's hard, right? Oftentimes we are getting our asses kicked all up and down the ballot, but we can't stop fighting. So yeah, I just wanted to share that. And we have about 20 minutes left. So I'm going to get back into screen sharing so that we can get through this first part. And I'm hoping to see all of you back here in 2 weeks, along with a friend or two, to dive into public narrative, story of self, because right now what we're seeing in the media is we are losing the battle of public narrative, right? The people who are controlling the story is the opposition. Their story is being told and ours is not. So we have to get very clear about what we believe in, what we want, and how we get there. And I think that refining our narrative is the first step into doing that. So I'm praying that the next slide that I'm going to pull up when I start sharing goes into public narrative. And no, of course, it started all over from the beginning, but just bear with me, and we will get it going very soon. Oh, wait, resume. What? Oh, there we go. Look, see, I'm learning. So we've talked about narrative a little bit, story of self. Your story of self is the why. What brings you here? You've talked to your people about what you want, and now you want to motivate people into meaningful action, right? So we're talking about heart, head, and hands, right? Heart is that story of self, that passionate part of you that talks about what you've been through to bring you here. The how we'll get to later. That's about all of the strategy, analysis, power mapping, all of those sort of tangible skills that you need in order to build campaigns. But those two things, the how and the why and the how, brings it all together to drive your people to meaningful action. Showing up to the protest, writing that letter, calling that legislator. That's how we drive people to act. So into public narrative, you just heard Richie and Sam and my story of self. The next step in building a public narrative. So first, we're going to master story of self. And in a follow-up email after this session, you will get some worksheets and a little workbook that will help you work through your story of self, why you are called to leadership in this moment. And story of self, the arc is challenge, choice, outcome, right? I talked about being a teenage mother, having twins at 19. That was a challenge, right? And I had a choice. I was dissatisfied with the care that we received in the hospital. I could have gone on about my life and done something different, but I had a choice, and my choice became to become a nurse. And through that, I discovered that there was more work that I could do outside of nursing to affect change. And the outcome of that is I became an organizer. I ran for public office. And now I'm here today sharing that story with other folks in hopes that it compels them to act also, right? So that's my story of self, where you have challenge, choice, outcome. And you will all get in a follow-up email, a workbook to help you sort of work through your story of self. And I just want to share with you that your story of self doesn't always have to come out of tragedy or trauma. It doesn't always have to be something that you're angry or upset about or a failure. And those places are good places to start also, but it can also be that, like, I've had a privileged life and I recognize the injustices that are happening, and I choose this for different reasons than other people do. So don't feel like you have to like dig deep and find some sort of traumatic event to start your story with, because all of our stories are valid and true and important. But in the arc of public narrative, you get self, and we're going to work on that. But you also get the us, right? Why do other people care about that experience, right? In the example of my story, it started with my own children, and then it started with other people's children. And the reason why people should care is because this is our future. This is our society that is overall failing all of us. And children don't have the means to fight, right? Like, they don't have power, they don't have many resources, and it's up to us to be able to make sure that they are healthy, whole, taken care of, housed, fed, and all of those things, right? That is the thread that ties my story to the us. In the now, how I invited others to take action is saying, hey, we were all out here in these streets together all summer in 2020, and the people in power didn't pay us any attention. They didn't give us anything that we wanted. And what are we going to do about it, right? I think in this moment, we can say, hey, we were told vote blue no matter who. We voted blue. We have a Democratic trifecta. We don't have Build Back Better. We haven't protected voting rights. Roe versus Wade is being overturned. And what are we going to do? Like, this now is the actual now that we have to galvanize and activate and mobilize our people to say that we are not going to take this anymore. All right, so again, another sort of graphic about how your public narrative goes. It always begins with your story of self. When were you politicized? When did you learn to care? I will tell you that, shortly after graduating nursing school and having employment for the first time in my life that made me financially secure, there was a period of time where I didn't really care. My family was secure. I was good. My children were healthy. I could pay for private school. And making the transition, first finding out how racist and classist healthcare was from the inside, and also seeing the disparities in treatment in the school system, was the moment that I needed to start caring again. So we all have that moment that you learn to care. Something happens. Maybe it's a single event, or maybe it's a series of compounding events that makes you feel like you have to do something, that you're motivated to create change. And the other question that you want to ask for your story of self is, when did you find hope? Or have you? Maybe you haven't found hope yet. Maybe you're here now because you're still looking to find hope. So we're going to dive deeper into that. Like I said, I'm going to email out the workbook for folks to work on that independently and be able to share back when we get back together in 2 weeks. But know that coming up after this is going to be the story of us. When did we learn to care? And how do we find our hope? What are the common threads that bring us all together? There's a word that we use frequently that we don't talk enough about, which is called intersectionality. All of our struggles and movements are bound together. If one of us is bound, none of us are free, right? Our liberation is literally collective. We can't solve the housing crisis without thinking about over-policing. We can't solve food insecurity without thinking about labor rights. Like, our liberation is literally tied together. So when we get deeper into it, we'll talk about like the collective us and we, and then the now. Where's the urgency? Why is it? I think we all know, if you watch the news, if you're on Twitter, even if you go to the grocery store or the gas station, you know that we are in a moment of uncertainty, but also urgency. We must act now. So we have 9 minutes left. And what I want to do right now is take a pause and answer any questions that folks might have. And also just, again, reiterate that successful organizers take years to develop these skills. There's no way to get this in an hour. I hope that this introduction has been helpful. I definitely appreciate feedback, deltas, anything that you feel like could have been more helpful, or anything that you felt like was missing. Please email me at india@rootsaction.com. And please, please, please sign up for the next session if you haven't already, where we'll dig deeper into the story of self. And also feel free to invite a friend or 5. And now I'm gonna peruse the chat for any questions that may be outstanding. And I see Michael has your hand up. So is it okay if I ask you to unmute, Michael, and you can just ask your question out loud? Well, I guess if you're not unmuted,
yes.
There you go.
Hi, Indy. Yes. By the way, like I said, I want to say congratulations to you. You came very close in the memorial race.
Thank you. Thank you
I know
so much.
stuff. Yeah, my question is because you mentioned about intersectionality, and I've been doing a lot of thinking, and I'm sure you read in the chat section. I'm not that I'm against intersectionality. I think it's important, but when it comes to like what's happening today, especially with police brutality, white supremacy, redlining, Black Americans, wealth is declining because of 400 years of Jim Crow segregation, slavery, lynching, etc. And I'll say this, that a majority of Black Americans don't think that intersectionality will benefit them, because what they notice that when you have when you see like white women fighting for equality, it doesn't mean white women are going to fight for Black women necessarily, or even passing free public education make us going to benefit Black people. And I'm not saying these policies are not needed, they're needed, but Black people, Black Americans need set asides, such as caste reparations, ending qualified immunity, defunding the police, because if you defund the police, but then you don't end qualified immunity, sure, you can decrease the police budgets, but the police are still gonna have more power. Meaning, like, sure, they can't use their guns, they can't draw their weapons against unarmed Black people. They're gonna find other forms to have, other forms to maintain power, such as chokeholds. So I do think that intersectionality needs to be carefully crafted, because a lot of Black Americans are not gonna vote in higher numbers for Democrats. And I'm just very curious, like, because everybody needs set asides. You look at LGBT, they receive money. Hispanics receive money. Other immigrants receive money. The only people who has not received direct payments or money is Black American descendants of slavery.
I hear you, and thank you for your thoughts. And in my opinion, the most important thing that we can do is build relationships, right? Like I don't expect allies of mine who are white to understand what I've gone through unless I've been able to express it to them, right? You don't know what you don't know, I guess, is kind of the answer. So we have a lot of work to do in building relationships and increasing the understanding of how redlining, police brutality, Jim Crow America has really had institutional and systemic impacts on Black and brown folks, right? Like, we carry that trauma in our DNA.
Yes.
We're literally born with it. So the conditions in our community are not only a result of personal choice, but systems that have been put in place, right? When people say the system is broken, I disagree. The system is working exactly how it was intended to. And I think another thing that we have to get real about is that we're all broke, right? The system is not only negatively impacting Black and brown people. Of course, there's always a disparity. It's oppressing working class people, poor people, right? I was just talking to a colleague earlier, and I said my conspiracy theory these days is that vote blue no matter who is actually a campaign of the GOP. And they snuck in like Democrats in disguise that we've been led to believe are going to fight for us, but they haven't, because they aren't Democrats. But the reality is that there are not two parties in this country. There are two classes. There's the 1%, and then there's everyone else, right? And I think that bringing in that class struggle in the racial and gender dynamic is going to be vitally important moving forward to make sure that we're able to actually win and succeed and not be divided over who gets what, but really understanding.
Right. I'm not saying right. Right. I'm not saying.
I'm sorry, this is Sam. I just want to say, I want to give other folks a chance to ask their questions too, because I see we have other hands up. So thanks for your question, but I think we have to move on to the next person now. Thank you.
Yep. And email me, Michael. We'll talk more. Andrea. Oh, I have to unmute you. I keep forgetting. I'm sorry.
Thank you. I agree with so much of what you said, especially the class struggle, which is why my organization has as one of its foundational pillars economic justice. To me, economic justice is the foundation of all other injustices, because all other injustices are either a byproduct of economic injustice or are used directly to support economic injustice. But this is the issue that I would like to ask if you will be addressing that in more detail later on, and that is, in terms of coalition building, I find that one of the most difficult things is that the organizations that I deal with, everyone has their particular issue that they are most concerned about. And how do we work together, even though we have, just as you said, we're all broke, we all are stretched, we have no bandwidth because we're all working so hard on what we're working on. How do we find a way to work together, even though we all have very specific things that differ that we're working on? And so hopefully, because that's the biggest hurdle I think that we have to get over here in San Diego.
I agree, and Buffalo is no different. We are very siloed, and we also have lots of orgs that are driven by funding opportunities, right? Whatever the grantors say needs to be done is how people move and do, and we're not being authentic and carrying forward the grassroots issues that we're hearing about in the community, but like being driven by how we're funding positions and keeping organizations afloat. So that is definitely something that I want to tackle. There is a book called The Revolution Will Not Be Funded. And we have to get real about the sacrifices that are going to have to be made in order to get the change that we actually really need. And also, like, all of these benevolent benefactors, right? The wealthy people on the left who choose to fund electoral campaigns, like, how do we tap into some of that energy to fund some issues, right? The right and the anti-abortion lobby, the oil lobby, they have lots of money to run campaigns and convince legislators to act on their behalf. So like, where are the folks who will tweet to their 10 million Twitter followers about an issue, but like pony up some of those dollars, because we know that there are people who believe what we believe that also have the capacity to give. So like, just trying to tap into that as well. We're at time. I want to thank everyone for coming. I'll send out a follow-up email with the workbook for Story of Self, and sign up for subsequent, what are these called? Teach-ins. And feel free to share it, forward it, invite your people. Like I said, I'm an expert on my own life experiences, and I'm excited to learn with all of you and continue to move the work forward. So thank you for showing up. Thank you for your time and your attention and all of your thoughts. And hopefully see you again in 2 weeks.